You have learned of the sense perceptive and judicial processes by which your mind acquires its knowledge of the outside world. You come now to a study of the phenomenon of memory, the instrument by which your mind retains and makes use of its knowledge, the agency that has power to resurrect the buried past, or power to enfold us in a paradise of dreams more perfect than reality. In the broadest sense, memory is the faculty of the mind by which we 1. Retain, 2. Recall, 3. Picture to the mind's eye, and 4. Recognize past experiences. Memory involves, therefore, 4 elements: retention, recall, imagination, and recognition. Almost everyone seems to think that we retain in the mind only those things that we can voluntarily recall. That memory, in other words, is limited to the power of voluntary reproduction. This is a profound error, an inexcusable error. The daily papers are constantly reporting cases of the lapse and restoration of memory that contain all the elements of underlying truth on this subject. Causes of forgetfulness. It is plain enough that the memory seems decidedly limited in its scope. This is because our power of voluntary recall is decidedly limited. But it does not follow simply because we are without the power to deliberately recall certain experiences that all mental trace of those experiences is lost to us. Those experiences that we are able to recall are those that we disregarded when they occurred because they possessed no special interest for us. They are there, but no mental associations or connections with power to awaken them have arisen in consciousness. Things are continuously happening all around us that we see with but half an eye. They are in the fringe of seeing with half an eye consciousness, and we deliberately ignore them. Many more things come to us in the form of sense impressions that clamorously assail our sense organs, but no effort of the will is needed to ignore them. We are absolutely impervious to them and unconscious of them because they are a selection of our life interests. We have closed the doors against them. In either case, whether in the fringe of consciousness or entirely outside of consciousness, these unperceived sensations will be found to be sensory images that have no connection with the present subject of thought. They therefore attract, and we spare them no part of our attention. Just as each of our individual sense organs selects from the multitude of either vibrations constantly beating upon the surface of the body, only those waves to the velocity of which it is attuned. So each one of us, as an integral personality, selects from the stream of sensory experiences only those particular objects of attention that are in some way related to the present or habitual trend of thoughts. Just consider for a moment the countless number and variety of impressions that assail the eye and ear of the New Yorker who walks down Broadway in a busy hour of the day. Yet, to how few of those does he pay the slightest attention? He is in the midst of a cataclysm of sound almost equal to the roar of Niagara, and he does not know it. Observe how many objects are right now in the corner of your mind's eye as being within the space of your vision, while your entire attention is apparently absorbed in these lines. You see these other things, and you can look back and realize that you have seen them, but you were not aware of them at that time. Let two individuals of contrary tastes take a day's outing together. Both may have during the day practically identical sensory images, but each one will come back with an entirely different tale to tell of the day's adventures. All sensory impressions, somehow or other, leave their faint impression on the waxen tablets of the mind. Few are or can be voluntarily recalled. Just where and how memories are retained is a mystery. There are theories that represent sensory experiences as actual physiological impressions on the cell of the brain. They are, however, nothing but theories, and the manner in which the brain, as the organ of the mind, keeps its record of sensory experiences has never been discovered. Microscopic anatomy has never reached the point where it could identify. A few instances will serve to illustrate the remarkable power of retention of the human mind. Sir William Hamilton quotes the following from Coleridge's Literaria Biographia. A young woman of 4 or 5 and 20 who could neither read nor write was seized with a nervous fever, during which, according to the asseverations of all the priests and monks of the neighborhood, she became possessed, and as it appeared by a very learned devil. She continued incessantly talking Latin, Greek, and Hebrew in the very pompous tones, and with most distinct enunciation. Sheets full of her ravings were taken down from her own mouth, and were found to consist of sentences coherent and intelligible, each for itself, but with little or no connections with each other. Of the Hebrew, a small portion only could be traced to the Bible. The remainder seems to be rabbinical dialect. The case was investigated by a physician who learned that the girl had been a waif and had been taken in charge by a Protestant clergyman when she was 9 years old and brought up as his servant. This clergyman had 4 years been in the habit of walking up and down a passage of his house, into which the kitchen door opened, and at the same time reading to himself in a loud voice from his favorite book. A considerable number of these books were still in the possession of his niece, who told the physician that her uncle had been a very learned man, an accomplished student of Hebrew. Among the books were found a collection of rabbinical writings, together with several of the Greek and Latin fathers. And the physician succeeded in identifying so many passages in these books with those taken down at the bedside of the young woman that there could be no doubt as to the true origin of her learned ravings. Now, the striking feature of all this, it will be observed, is the fact that the subject was an illiterate servant girl to whom the Greek, Latin, and Hebrew quotations were utterly unintelligible, that normally she had no recollection of them, that she had no idea of their meaning, and finally, that they had been impressed upon her mind without her knowledge while she was engaged in her duties in her master's kitchen. Several cases are reported by Dr. Abercrombie and quoted by Professor Hislop, in which mental impressions, long since forgotten beyond the power of voluntary recall, have been revived by the shock of accident or disease. A man, he says, mentioned by Mr. Abernethy had been born in France but had spent the greater part of his life in England and for many years had entirely lost the habit of speaking French. But when under the care of Mr. Abernethy, on account of the effects of an injury to the head, he always spoke French. A similar case occurred in St. Thomas Hospital of a man who was in a state of stupor in consequence of an injury to the head. On his partial recovery, he spoke a language which nobody in the hospital understood, but which was soon ascertained to be Welsh. It was then discovered that he had been 30 years absent from Wales and therefore, before the accident, had entirely forgotten his native language. A lady mentioned by Dr. Pritchard, when in a state of delirium, spoke a language which nobody about her understood, but which was afterward discovered to be Welsh. None of her friends could form any conception of the manner in which she had become acquainted with that language. But living past experiences over again after much inquiry, it was discovered that in her childhood she had a nurse, a native of a district on the coast of Brittany, the dialect of which is closely analogous to Welsh. The lady at that time learned a good deal of this dialect, but had entirely forgotten it for many years before this attack of fever. Dr. Carpenter relates the following incident in his Mental Physiology. Several years ago, the Reverend S. Mansard, now rector of Bethnal Green, was doing clerical duty for a time at Hurstmonceux in Sussex, and while there he one day went over with a party of friends to Pevensey Castle, which he did not remember to have ever previously visited. As he approached the gateway, he became conscious of a very vivid impression of having seen it before, and he seemed to himself to see not only the gateway itself, but donkeys beneath the ark and people on top of it. His conviction that he must have visited the castle on some former occasion, although he had neither the slightest remembrance of such a visit nor any knowledge of having ever been in the neighbourhood previously to his residence at Hurstmonceux, made him inquire from his mother if she could throw any light on the matter. She at once informed him that being in that part of the country when he was but 18 months old, she had gone over with a large party and had taken him in the pannier of a donkey. That the elders of the party, having brought lunch with them, had eaten it on the roof of the gateway, where they would have been seen from below, whilst he had been left on the ground with the attendants and donkeys. An Italian gentleman, says Dr. Rush, of Philadelphia, who died of yellow fever in New York, in the beginning of his illness spoke English, in the middle of its French, but on the day of his death only Italian. Striking as these instances are, they are not unusual. Everyone on reflection can supply similar instances. Who among us has not at one time or another been impressed with a mysterious feeling of having at some time in the past gone through the identical experiences which he is living now? On such occasions, the sense of familiarity is sometimes so persistent as to fill one with a strange feeling of the supernatural and to incline our minds to the belief in reincarnation. The flash of inspiration, which for the lawyer solves a novel legal issue arising in the trial of a case, or for the surgeon sees him successfully through the emergencies of a delicate operation, has its origin in the forgotten learning of past experience and study. Succeeding books in this course will bring to light numerous other facts less commonly observed, drawn indeed from the study of abnormal mental states, indicating that we retain a great volume of sense impressions of whose very recording we are at the time unaware. In other words, all the evidences point to the absolute totality of our retention of all sensory experiences. They indicate that every sense impression you ever received, whether you actually perceived and were conscious of it or not, has been retained and preserved in your memory, and can be brought to your mind when you somehow, somewhere, all experiences, whether subject to voluntary recall or not, are preserved and are capable of reproduction when the right stimulus comes along. And it is a law that those experiences which are associated with each other, whether ideas, emotions, or voluntary or involuntary muscular movements, tend to become bound together into groups, and these groups tend to become bound together into systems. Such a system of associated groups of experiences is technically known as a complex. Pay particular attention to these definitions, as groups of ideas and complexes of ideas, emotions, and muscular movements are terms that we shall constantly employ. You learned in a former lesson that mental experiences may consist not only of sense perceptions based on excitements arising in the memory nerves, but also of bodily emotions, the feeling tones of ideas, and of muscular movements based on stimuli arising in the motor nerves. Groups consist, therefore, not only of associated ideas, but of associated ideas coupled with their emotional qualities and impulses to muscular movements. All groups bound together by a mutually related idea constitute a single complex. Every memory you have is an illusion of such complexes. Suppose, for example, you once gained success in a business deal. Your recollection of the other persons concerned in that transaction, of any one detail in the transaction itself, will be accompanied by the faster heartbeat, the quickened circulation of the blood, the feeling of triumph, and elation that attended the original experience. Complexes formed out of harrowing earthquakes, robberies, murders, or other dreadful spectacles, which are originally accompanied on the part of the onlooker by trembling perspiration and palpitation of the heart, when lived over again in memory, are again accompanied by all these bodily activities. Your memory of a hairbreadth escape will bring to your cheek the pallor that marked it when the incident occurred. The formation and existence of complexes explains the origin of many functional diseases of the body. That is to say, diseases involving no loss or destruction of tissues, but consisting simply in a failure on the part of some bodily organ to perform its allotted function naturally and effectively. Thus, in hay fever or rose cold, the tears, the inflammation of the membranes of the nose, the cough, the other trying symptoms, all are linked with the sight of a rose or dust or sunlight or some other outside fact to which attention has been called as the cause of hay fever into a complex and automatically working mechanism. And the validity of this explanation of the regular reoccurrence of attacks of this disease is sufficiently demonstrated by the fact that a paper rose is likely to prove just as effective in producing all the symptoms of the disease as a rose out of nature's garden. Another striking illustration of the working of this principle is afforded by two gentlemen of my acquaintance, brothers, each of whom, since boyhood, has had unfailing attacks of sneezing upon first arising in the morning. No sooner is one of these men awake and seated upon the edge of his bed for dressing than he begins to sneeze, and he continues to sneeze for 15 or 20 minutes thereafter. Although he has no cold and never sneezes at any other time, obviously, if absolutely all mental experiences are preserved, they consist altogether of two broad classes of complexes. First, those that are momentarily active and conscious, forming part of the present mental picture, and second, all the others, that is to say, all past experiences that are not at the present moment before the mind's eye. There are then conscious complexes and subconscious complexes, complexes of subconscious and complexes of subconsciousness. And of the complexes of subconsciousness, some are far more readily recalled than others. Some are forever popping into one's thoughts, while others can be brought into the light of consciousness only by some unusual and deep probing stimulus. And the human mind is a vast storehouse of complexes, far the greater part buried in the subconsciousness. Yet somehow, like impressions on the wax cylinder of a phonograph, preserved with lifelike truth and clearness. Turn back for a moment to our definition of memory. The reoccurrence or stimulus of one element in a complex tends to recall all others. In our explanation of complex formulation, we necessarily cited instances that illustrate this principle as well, and since recall is merely a reverse operation from that involved in complex formation. For example, in running through a book, I come upon a flower pressed between its pages. At once, the memory of the friend who gave it to me springs into consciousness and becomes the subject of reminiscence. This recalls the mountain village where we last met. This recalls the fact of a railroad was at the time under process of construction, which should transform the village into a popular resort. This in turn suggests my coming trip to the seashore, and I am reminded of a business appointment on which my ability to leave town on the appointed day depends, and so on indefinitely. Far the greater part of your successive states of consciousness, or even of your ordinary thinking, commonly so-called consists of train of mental pictures suggested one by another. If the associated pictures are of the everyday type, common to everyone, you have a prosaic mind. If, on the other hand, the associations are unusual or unique, you are happily possessed of wit and fancy. These instances of the action of the law of recall illustrate but one phase of its activity. They show simply that groups of ideas are so strung together on the string of some common element that the activity of one group in consciousness is apt to be automatically followed by the others. But the law of association goes deeper than this. It enters into the activity of every individual group and causes all the elements of every group, ideas, emotions, and impulses to muscular movements to be simultaneously manifested. There is no principle to which we shall more continuously refer to than this one. Our explanation of hay fever a moment ago illustrates our meaning. Get the principle clearly in your mind and see how many instances of its operation you can yourself supply from your own daily experience. So far as the mere linking together of groups of ideas is concerned, this classifying quality is developed in some persons to a greater degree than in others. It finds its extreme exemplar in the type of man who can never relate an incident without reciting all the prolix and minute details, and at the same time wandering far from the original subject in pursuit of every suggested idea. Similarity and nearness in time or space between two experiential facts causes the thoughts of one to tend to recall the thought of the other. This is the associative law of contiguity considered from the standpoint of recall. The points of contiguity are different for different individuals. Similarities and nearness will awaken all sorts of associated groups of ideas in one person that are not at all excitable in the same way in another whose experiences have been different. The greater the frequency and intensity of any given experience, the greater the ease and likelihood of its reproduction and recall. This explains why certain groups in any complex are more readily recalled than others, why some leap forth unbidden, why some come next and before others, why some arrive but tardily or not at all. This is how the associative laws of habit and intensity affects the power of recall. There is no department of business to which the application of these laws of recall is so apparent as the department of advertising. The most carefully worded and best illustrated advertisement may fail to pay its cost unless the underlying principles of choice of position, selection of medium, and size of space are understood. The advertisers in metropolitan newspapers and magazines of large circulation are the ones who have most at stake. But whatever the field to be reached, it is well to bear in mind certain facts based on the laws of recall that have been established by psychological experiments. Most advertisers have a general idea that certain relative positions on the newspaper or magazine pages are to be preferred over others, but they have no conception of the real differences in relative recall value. When the great cost of space in large publications is considered, the financial value of such knowledge is evident. By a number of tests, the relative recall value of every part of the newspaper page has been approximately determined. Attention is the instrumentality through which the laws of recall operate. Writingly or unwritingly, consciously or unconsciously, every man's attention swings in automatic obedience to the laws of recall. Attention is the artisan that, bit by bit and with lightning quickness, constructs the mosaic of consciousness. Having the whole vast store of all present and past experiences to draw upon, he selects only those groups and those isolated instances that are related to our general interests and aims. He disregards others. The attention operates in a manner complementary to the general laws of recall. It is an active principle, not of association, but of disassociation. You choose, for example, a certain aim in life. You decide to become the inventor of an aeroplane of automatic stability. This choice henceforth determines two things. First, it determines just which of the sensory experiences of any given moment are most likely to be selected for your conscious perception. Secondly, it determines just which of your past experiences will be most likely to be recalled. Such a choice, in other words, determines to some the extent of sort of elements that will most probably be selected to make up at any moment the contents of your consciousness. From the instant that you make such a choice, you are on the alert for facts relevant to the subject of your ambition. Upon them, you concentrate your attention. They are presented to your consciousness with greater precision and clearness than other facts. All facts that pertain to the art of flying henceforth cluster and cling to your conscious memory like iron filings to a magnet. All that are impertinent to this main pursuit are dissociated from these intensely active complexes and in time fade into subconscious forgetfulness. By subconscious forgetfulness, we mean a compartment, as it were, of that reservoir in which all past experiences are stored. Consciousness is a momentary thing. It is passing state. It is ephemeral and flitting. It is made up in part of present sense impressions and in part of past experiences. These past experiences are brought forth from subconsciousness. Some are voluntarily brought forth, some present themselves without our conscious violation, but by the operation of the laws of association and disassociation. Some we seem unable voluntarily to recall, yet they may appear when least we are expecting them. It is these last to which we have referred as lost in subconscious forgetfulness. As a matter of fact, none are ever actually lost. All the wealth of your past experiences is still yours, a concrete part of your personality. All that is required to make it available for your present use is a sufficient concentration of your attention, a concentration of attention that shall dwell persistently and exclusively upon those associations that bear upon the fact desired. The tendency of the mind toward disassociation, a function limiting the indiscriminate recall of associated groups, is also manifested in all of us in the transfer to unconsciousness of many muscular activities. As infants, we learn to walk only by giving to every movement of the limbs the most deliberate conscious attention. Yet in time, the complicated cooperation of muscular movements involved in walking becomes involuntary and unconscious, so that we are no longer even aware of them. It is the same with reading, writing, playing upon musical instruments. the manipulation of all sorts of mechanical devices, the 1,001 other muscular activities that become what we call habitual. The moment one tries to make these habitual activities again dependent on the conscious will, he encounters difficulties. The centipede was quite happy until the toad for fun said, "Pray, which leg goes after which?" They stirred his mind to such a pitch he lay distracted in a ditch, considering how to run. All these habitual activities are started as acts of painstaking care and conscious attention. All ultimately become unconscious. They may, however, be started or stopped at will. They were therefore still related to the conscious mind. They occupy a semi-automatic middle. It is evident that if what we have been describing as the process of recall is true, then the commonly accepted idea that practice in memorizing makes memorizing easier is false, and that there is no truth in the popular figure of speech that likens the memory to a muscle that grows stronger with use. So far as the memory is concerned, however, practice may result in a more or less unconscious improvement in the methods of memorizing. Torture of the drill. By practice, we come to unconsciously discover and employ new associative method in our recording of facts, making them easier to recall. But we can certainly add nothing to the actual scope and power of retention. Yet many books on memory trainings have wide circulation whose authors, showing no conception of the process involved, seek to develop the general ability to remember by incessant practice in memorizing particular facts, just as one would develop a muscle by exercise. The following is quoted from a well-known work of this character. I am now treating a case of loss of memory in a person advanced in years who did not know that this memory had failed most remarkably until I told him of it. He is making vigorous efforts to bring it back again, and with partial success. The method pursued is to spend 2 hours daily, one in the morning and one in the evening, in exercising this faculty. The patient is instructed to give the closest attention to all that he learns, so that it shall be impressed on his mind clearly. He is asked to recall every evening all the facts and experiences of the day, and in again the next morning. Every name heard is written down and impressed on his mind clearly, and an effort made to recall it at intervals. 10 names from among public men are ordered to be committed to memory every week. A verse of poetry is to be learned, also a verse from the Bible daily. He is asked to remember the number of the page of any book where any interesting fact is recorded. These and other methods are slowly resuscitating a failing memory. As remarked by Professor James, it is hard to believe that the memory of the poor old gentleman is a bit the better for all this torture, except in respect to the particular facts thus wrought into it. The occurrences attended to and repeated on those days, the names of those politicians, those Bible verses, etc., etc. The error in the book first quoted from lies in the fact that its author looks upon a failing memory as indicating a loss of retentiveness. The real cause is the loss of an intensity of interest. It is the failure to form sufficiently large groups and complexes of related ideas, emotions, and muscular movements associated with a particular fact to be remembered. There is no reason to believe that the retention of sensory experiences is not at all times perfectly mechanical and mechanically perfect. Interest is a mental yearning. It is the offspring of desires and the mother of memory. It goes out spontaneously to anything that can add to the sum of one's knowledge about the thing desired. A manufactured interest is counterfeit. When a thing is done because it has to be done, desire dies and duty is born. In proportion as a subject is associated with duty, it is divorced from interests. If you want to impress anything on another man's mind so that he will remember it, harness it up with the lure of desire. Diffused interests is the cause of all unprofitable forgetfulness. Do not allow your attentions to grope vaguely among a small number of things. Whatever you do, make a business of doing it with your whole soul. Turn the spotlight of your mind upon it, and you will not forget it. We recall things by their associates. When you set your mind to remember any particular fact, your conscious effort should be not vaguely to will that it shall be impressed and retained, but analytically and deliberately to connect it with one or more other facts already in your mind. The student who crams for an examination makes no permanent addition, cramming and willing to his knowledge. There can be no recall without association, and cramming allows no time to form associations. If you find it difficult to remember a fact or a name, do not waste your energies in willing it to return. Try to recall some other fact or name associated with the first in time or place or otherwise, and lo, when you least expect it, it will pop into your thoughts. If your memory is good in most respects but poor in a particular line, it is because you do not interest yourself in that line and therefore have no material for association. Blind Tom's memory was a blank on most subjects, but he was a walking encyclopedia on music. To improve your memory, you must increase the number and variety of your mental associations. Many ingenious methods, scientifically correct, have been devised to aid in the remembering of particular facts. These methods are based wholly on the principle that it is most easily recalled which is associated in our minds with the most complex and elaborate groupings of related ideas. In the pursuit of this method, the teacher will compare all that is far off and foreign to something that is near home, making the unknown plain by the example of the known and connecting all the instructions with the personal experience of the pupil. If the teacher is to explain the distance of the sun from the earth, let him ask, if anyone there in the sun fired off a cannon straight at you, what should you do? Get out of the way? Would be the answer. No need of that, the teacher might reply. You may quietly go to sleep in your room and get up again. You may wait till your confirmation day. You may learn a trade and grow as old as I am. Then only will the cannonball be getting near. Then you may jump to one side. See, so great as that is the sun's distance. We shall now show you how to apply this principle in improving your memory and in making a more complete use of your really vast store of knowledge. Rule 1. Make systematic use of your sense organs. Do you find it difficult to remember names? It is because you do not link them in your mind with enough associations. Every time a man is introduced to you, look about you. Who is present? Take note of as many as great a variety of surrounding facts and circumstances as possible. Think of the man's name and take another look at his face, his dress, his physique. Think of his name and at the same time his voice and manner. Think of his name and mark the place where you are now for the first time meeting him. Think of this name in conjunction with the name and personality of the friend who presented him. Memory is not a distinct faculty of mind in the sense that one man is generously endowed in that respect while another is deficient. Memory, as meaning the power of voluntary recall, is wholly a question of trained habits of mental operation. Your memory is just as good as mine or any other man's. It is your indifference to what you would call irrelevant facts that is at fault. Therefore, cultivate habits of observation. Fortify the observed facts you wish to recall with a multitude of outside associations. Never rest with a mere halfway knowledge of things. To assist you in training yourself in those habits of observation that make a good memory of outside facts, we append the following exercises. A. Walk slowly through a room with which you are not familiar. Then make a list of all the contents of the room you can recall. Do this every day for a week using a different room each time. Do it not half-heartedly, but as if your life depends on your ability to remember. At the end of the week, you'll be surprised at the improvement you have made. B. As you walk along the street, observe all that occurs in a space of one block, things heard as well as things seen. 2 hours later, make a list of all you can recall. Do this twice a day for 10 days. Then compare results. C. Make a practice of recounting each night the incidents of the day. The prospect of having this to do will cause you unconsciously to observe more attentively. This is the method by which Thurlow-Weed acquired his phenomenal memory. As a young man with political ambitions, he had been much troubled by his inability to recall names and faces. So he began the practice each night of telling his wife the most minute details of incidents that had occurred during the day. He kept this up for 50 years, and it so trained his powers of observation that he became as well known for his unfailing memory as for his political adroitness. D. Glance once at an outline map of some state. Put it out of sight and draw one as nearly like it as you can. Then compare it with the original. Do this frequently. E. Have someone read you a sentence out of a book and you then repeat it. Do this daily, gradually increasing the length of the quotations from short sentences to whole paragraphs. Try to find out what is the extreme limit of your ability in this respect compared with that of other members of your family. Rule 2. Fix ideas by their associates. There are other things to be remembered besides facts of outside observation. You are not one whose life is passed entirely in a physical world. You live also within. Your mind is unceasingly at work with the materials of the past, painting the pictures of the future. You are called upon to scheme, to plan, to devise, to invent, to compose, and to foresee. If all the mental work is not wasted energy, you must be able to recall its conclusion when occasion requires. A happy thought comes to you. Will you remember it tomorrow when the hour for action arrives? There is but one way to be sure, and that is by making a study of the whole associative mental process. Review the train of ideas by which you reached your conclusion. Carry the thought on in mind to its legitimate conclusion. See yourself acting upon it. Mark its relation to the other persons. Note all the details of the mental picture. In other words, to remember thoughts, cultivate thought observation just as you cultivate sense observation to remember outside matters. To train yourself in thought memory, use the following exercise. A. Every morning at 8 o'clock, sharp on the minute, fix upon a certain idea and determine to recall it at a certain hour during the day. Put your whole will into this resolution. Try to imagine what activities you will be engaged in that appointed hour, and think of the chosen idea as identified with those activities. Associate in your mind with some object that will be at hand when the set time comes. Having thus fixed the idea in your mind, forget it. Do not refer to it in your thoughts. With practice, you will find yourself automatically carrying out your own orders. Persist in this exercise for at least 3 months. B. Every night when you retire, fix upon the hour at which you wish to get up in the morning. In connection with your waking at that hour, think of all the sounds that will be apt to be occurring at that particular time. Bar every other thought from your consciousness and fall asleep with the intense determination to arise at this time set. By all means, get up instantly when you awaken. Keep up this exercise and you will soon be able to awaken at any hour you may wish. See, every morning outline the general plan of your activities for the day. Select only the important things. Do not bother with the details. Determine upon the logical order for your day's work. Think not so much of how you are to do things as of the things you are to do. Keep your mind on results, and having made your plan, stick to it. Be your own boss. Let nothing tempt you from your set purpose. Make this daily planning a habit and hold it through life. It will give you a great lift towards whatever prize you seek. Rule 3. Search systematically and persistently. Once you have started upon an effort at recollection, persevere. The date or phase or event that you wish to recall is bound up with a multitude of other facts of observation and of your mind life of the past. Success in recalling it depends simply upon your ability to hit upon some idea so indissolubly associated with the object of search that the recall of one automatically recalls the order. Consequently,